I'll figure it out. Yeah.
The United States Operating Organization special laws, the Administration of the U.S. Except Octos, Federal law, right, recent for the use of the person that is copyright, a several more table, the U.S. is being challenged, yeah, 2004. Rebuilding water supervision law, paper for better relation valid, amending the future water, efficiency, people discovering ever and often, not resisting turning military testing to use the law, it's all that everyone's responsibility is not concerned of possibility, and now we can discriminate because we're allowed to sell against market and intention. Regards to every concerns, roadways are even filled up in city first of all, the time for fellows, every photo study, plus the military needs. The brink is now ratification to secure U.S. interests by right means, so big solution, adversary fall shaping, there's a north pole for that. Trump promises future safety actions deliver one just ratification on the U.S. and planning for building favorite action in order to achieve U.S. influence. Realize more very confident to ratify action, more longer ratifications are to ratify, and security guard will realize that U.S. influence or to protection of extracting with reasonable price must be ratification to that action to be established in the favorite verification of the bilaterally which stop, which should filter into access to the returning securities over research environmental research are fully consistent with U.S. programs. Now, scenario one is SDS. China's strategy is legal and intervention through this line of engagement and treaty distortion. It uses growing influence to advance authoritarian international law, and its interest in that SDS may go too far. China versus Korean Island using Westminster Dominic Project accountability, PRCs are purchased developed legal and strategic islands to legal technology sharing where the methods later to experts to the chief architects person is like the native responsibility, and other systems don't pursue the law transfer power sufficient and research sponsor result by variation lateral position and see how long the tool and matter as well as its pride for escalation now to 25. As I think you solution communications help work with hydrogen and depth versus handling accidents right in the front of the access to deeper fixation in 24. The access spectrum also takes an automatic trainable devotion with the available class easier as features for every family island with my two pieces as yes, one of these projects, the killing has to kind of control who's our favorite tries to see which one the relish, needed to control life to over the giant people are just in pressure also. For accidental beings with good words, if you walk which is poorly constituted watching the word variation all the activity accidents was national logic, and the parts are on the one person who just watch popular and model the which are clearly going through which will definitely into humanity, ratification, legal to US to challenge versus Chinese interpretation and diffuses passion into peaceful street resolution by the world. US overall should have rallied about an hours and vessels in the ground etc. The most ratification for us the information like hours of the and you might recommend for ratification reason our to consider really other knowledge since our members versus the disability problem not much every is one of the odds and easy to broad ratification and self emergency versus even coalition ratification rights to simple lack of accessibility as a way in essence arbitration dialogues and senate and introduce text and access ratification on legitimacy and single commitment to not the access ratification and increase access. Scenario 2 is an article prime for access to pretty bad. Article is a competition American Texas and maybe considering our representation so on a class of tables and surveillance of native predators and larger military and large areas can well beyond super water scope of competition because in China and strong competition to enforce power and critical content control for research finance. That's one respect in the state for aggression. Russia and China is long here to prove the works and dominant article with strike legend hard power and failing only the unified system to solve the pretty good. Opening that star opportunity versus the materials will create our sheet on terms of we not subject to the water on the skin and speech structure which is stronger. Next time trying to speed with a Russian type of closing on the architects now outpiece architects figure out the laws of first interpretation working with the town and artists and for laws of figure out to apply the laws and acquisitions of modify the violation and modify their behavior. The article is a tinderbox or escalation versus first and the self circumstance very complex stage clear one. The artificial political from the end people are not people are most likely not pursuing loss of contract of Italian people in the position of these are artificially or equal to the 80% leadership political is the article the 80% work side smallest and ICDs are golden tricks competing claims non-ratification fields artificial while eroding pairs and north trading so 24. Easiest thing we're replicating our version of the article is piloting on the insurance non-market on the JP non-market depending on the market to use the road up with the JP or have checked with the election those are which the piercing sound person and the usually is this kind of Russian piercing or keep law versus the easy election and research and area and IC perception will be derived by others the direction of your perception and the US is recommending even the perception is matter perception matters and growth credibility. Series 3 is mine. The US is ceding both window dominance and time is running out after ratification channeling into law and permanent monopoly by shifting north over 29. Strategic plus Marlborough's active competition with following kind of lectures on concern on its example, like the knowledge research not to be mind. The grades of Marlborough, which is oxygen abilities, like takes an option changing higher grade and check those while into the eyes just using inclusion as for things transition to the first week. The technically influence on reflection for access diversity innovation and the teaching abilities is not much companies are that and develop regulatory technological rights and Chinese influence that regulatory avoid formation altogether. Military readiness, precious law, military readiness, permission for that is ever called for 24. Dutch person having a community could use AR for the TV and actively responded of both bodies and working or working insurance now. The local insurance and constitution much of the there is some reactions Chinese Russians all the research and how to hospital. Very close to form over decades of years. The Crossman, written down and foreign years, the order of bill, rapid application, statute and goal, back up to work class 25. 48 results in China to save my classic for China, and the UK, directing a lot of action. I want to find multilateral authorities and season, mandating further research, pursuing case of the sales, responding use of clap, and purchase unit before the crack. Locking the issues are made to the economy that features sense interesting for to claim the environmental distinction of so many after competition some strength of the rapid age of China and presumably to violent trust and global not rest of the institution management the environmental ability right of planetary become fair areas to the government and research and market business here with many competitions to charge the element and industry to follow as much as many countries have those into symbiose and cooperation is high but they're the standard investments that will be execution outweighs the two universal putting zero to two. The intention was that you can think about what we need to know. Focus on major strategy for some power with some senior opportunities. Think about sheet or that claims that you reside and serve the future bodies that all of all looking like human being people serve to meet universal eligibility this year's much certainly address the mission of planetary contracts.
Yes, I heard those. The essay scenario seems to indicate that the US would have to use Octos and use diplomacy to be close to threat or war for reviewing evidence that Trump wants to use diplomacy.
Yeah, so the whole evidence is actually pretty specific on this. Every single Trump argument doesn't assume that Octos is in line with Trump's foreign policy. The top part of the whole evidence says that Trump's foreign policy is peace through strength.
Well, wait. So if it's in line with his foreign policy, why has he not mentioned it once? Why hasn't he even tried to do that? He supports the treaty.
Well, okay, it's a question of like whether Trump would comply with the treaty, and it's also like the whole evidence that Trump would not go back.
Okay, finish your answer. Finish your answer.
Well, the top of the whole evidence just said that it's in line with his foreign policy. Even if he doesn't directly want to ratify Octos now, it means that he will still comply with this provision and utilize that foreign once you're a party to it to be able to achieve foreign policy goals, i.e., it is out of his interest to have war with China because it is domestically unpopular and would be economically terrible.
It's out of his interest. Why is he using foreign terms right now? Which you said he's escalating now. You said that he's using hard deterrence and that's escalating right now because not one war. Why is he escalating?
Well, because he doesn't know that Octos is not an option or Octos is not.
But you just said he knows he's in line with this like foreign policy goals. Why does he not know it's a good idea?
Well, because hard power has been the strategy for the US for the past like since 1980.
Oh, sure. All right, Russia scenario. Why would Russia first strike in the Arctic?
Yeah, a couple of things. So the Freeman and Golden Seal, as well as NATO evidence, are pretty specific as to why competing claims in the Arctic and includes cooperation between China and Russia make the region prime for escalation. So the current the ECS claim that was filed most recently by the United States overlaps with Canada and Russia, and because we're not able to finalize claims to the CLCS, which we can only do as a party to Octos of Freeman evidence, it means that it will inevitably cause a race to fight over this claim by a military force and cause a race to stake the flag in that ECS claim to determine.
Okay, wait. So you've explained the scenario. You've still not explained to me where Russia just decides to nuke the Arctic.
It's a question of miscalculation, and also it's like because the US is not a party to Octos, Russia needs an opening to be able to claim that on.
The clue evidence says, quote, if China respected international law, therefore there wouldn't be any disputes in the first place. Given that it explicitly states that China does not abide by international law, how does the US force them to back down?
Yeah, that's a depiction of the status quo. The bottom of the Golden Seal evidence is pretty excellent at explaining why China would comply. It says, quote, that China would comply if fear lawsuits and accusations of legal violations may modify their behavior. The part above the article says only ratifying Octos can create that pressure to force China to comply. Second, the legal evidence says that it creates China is not rejecting Octos for international law or they're using Octos and legal instrumentalism to be able to achieve their foreign policy. China a few years ago did Octos ruled against them. They said that they would not abide by the
provision, how does the US government change their perspective on it?
Yeah, so the finding of evidence is pretty specific, that's why the grounds for China rejecting that and rejecting the US criticism is because the US is not a party to the treaty.
One C is gonna be 18 cases advantage, opt out, like scenario one, scenario three.
I need a second to
Yeah.
do more sheets.
Like this, yes. Unclosed the budget of global ocean privatization, but actually such a big economic privatization, global computing, global capital against water system, come there, just like growing randomized turn down and capitalism is systemically unsustainable, extinction, durable, movie, general responsibility, research, extinction, management, the alternative is to work international public globally popular. Recently, some of the laws are massive cost of money from the line and macro organization that some so it's struggle against social law and capital first policies during revolution. Use those of combination to win like they don't get around because they sort of prefer otherwise basically economic argument to their alternatives always come next up. Interpretation of the concept of treaties and the agency and number of hospitals violation of those who want to know candidate for this position or lazy definition of research. We think you want to check pages to be different question models. Next up. Interpretation of will specify how they become party based on the same processes. You need to see any party has some obligations that approval violation. They don't lack participation during that 2015 and they make debates a short term competition dealing instead by some more child make out of research. About this interpretation sequence definitions or definition of the big parties first in China to case until solve the NDCA or all one of theories. We made this 200 hours before spend a minute because like list of things back it can't such a topic of different venture chief may other hand come with good and we said that on the place here with real days all day all that we create a couple of the I'm just giving the negative data or fix next we help the opposite of yourself and knowing the other goal the next week being the hard no offer to mission but in space and other position with zero on gas and better people to use it next up. Capital President United of military review Article 1.5 and passing like this Congress that you have votes on pass even if they can't work from a vehicle social congressional higher tackle for them more information about we face many data service and don't be how original an example possibly president Congress for the pricing of this one possible next up. The United States should disband OPPR if and only if the United States becomes party to UNCLOS. Yeah, Trump disbands OPPR now, class of kinetic fairness extension English from book. Trump may be elected from OPPR, some opposing appropriately aggressive services of getting lost of government to the message. Proposing season which is speaking parametric or recognition of it. This is also going to make a percentage transfer to the spectrum of the process of simulation theory of dynamic rather as a behavior of sequence of the something which we invading. Next up. How about the Supreme Court of the United States to reverse common litigation laws within the past month of moving against oil and gas companies from unleashing all production and export that should independent store. Trump was not rules on the energy, but they don't have to export that into the operations. Not the last council, this is from the government, that kind of also on royalties goes to revenue to litigation goes. security and environment. Let's talk about security indicators. Next up. Capital, the United States should establish a housing for the purpose of avoiding war with China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and all relevant actors, substantially increase technology crisis and capabilities. In the Arctic and Southern Oceania, introduce regional allies, the same without converting, also not to make the weapons with the SCS market, substantially increase their Arctic expansion operation, environmental and fuel assault and stagnation. Sorry, other thing on the United States conservation of the nation, regardless of leadership rights, but it the housing crisis program and other station costs and brings to the case of Arctic, SCS Arctic conflict, the returns communication law, and the by starting okay, see how states are there. My course also range from religious literature, but this is not relations of market. Next up. Consequences materials are determined. This one course was solved. Previous course which is back in the group quite well. We are looking for the multi areas where the different locals of the survey can cause a little bit of a determinism, the gauge for the hot state and necessary for ability and common. So much of the lady with all the current life, the also was something I think about the something something else they will act the otherwise never go. Case. Not applies to the scope received 15. Local confinement north on 11 particular connection is the island. Easterly trip in China is not a thing, boy. But it has to go back to the coastal country question. So the average of the vacation is our US and Latin saying that's the 30 community from the noticing. The second group comes out of zero from the previous side. Only off on the tension of the language is not the CCP, just for the interpretation of all the way to the valley. And both degrees China blatantly valid flaws of African Stockholm answer. Harker being there's evidence includes Harker or China will never comply. Also says the region. No way they will talk about project is not going to involve 2026. Based on some conditions, as you have to resolve 26, that's our function and generation of the world channel ministry. So that's the issue was resolved extra locals as you feel mentioned. No, it's escalation channel. But obviously, the people kind of right on our education copies from the channel plus now technical on CP. Unfortunately, not the answer.
Good.
Yeah.
You want to please start with the arguments?
No.
Okay, good. The arguments that were not read were if and only if counterclaim was read, but the PTB was not.
Yeah.
And then the dark ships itself was not.
Yes.
Okay, great. I guess I want to talk about I guess the counterclaim. Well, spec become party to, there's only one way for the treaty to become party to a treaty in the United States. Why didn't you specify?
Do you and see evidence that that's actually false? Countries can become party to the
Country is
treaty?
not the US.
Yeah, but they claim, well, what the UN defines to become party to.
Well, but there's a very specific constitutional process when the US is ratified a treaty. Why do you?
I would disagree. Do you and see evidence that any
Okay,
country?
I mean, it's not about the US, that's
It's
not.
about becoming party. Which is what we're
Okay,
talking about.
covert policy not to use nuclear weapons. How do countries know that we have the doctor? What?
What did you say, silence?
Okay, the covert policy not to use nuclear weapons.
Sure.
I guess. Where have you read solvency evidence that such an entity can solve, and how would they even know that we declared the entity if it's covert?
No, see, it's not an NFU, you would just not use nukes in this region, even if China escalated, you would just not retaliate.
So we're gonna put China take Taiwan in this, yes.
Well, we make things that won't happen.
Our proof evidence is, the whole point of our proof evidence, the clear evidence is that China and Russia control the region, that causes extinction. How does this solve that?
No, see, those from stated, the reason it would cause extinction is because the US would retaliate, it would lead to escalation, miscalculation, that's what nukes do cause. We have functionally said the US cannot miscalculate because they are not allowed to launch nukes in the region. It's overt policy, so Russia and China don't become expansionists, if they don't know we're not gonna launch nukes.
Okay,
But we're not.
that's fine, but if and only if counterplan, so the bottom part of the counterplan says, you highlighted to say pandemic threats arise every year. The part that is unhighlighted says pandemic threats may not arise every year. Where does this card create an extinction impact? Or like, where does it ever say pandemics go existential?
I'll read it. Pandemics like weapons of mass destruction and climate change are transnational threats that potentially have existential consequences. No single department or agency can be responsible for any of them.
If no single department or agency is responsible, then how is expanding the OPPR? And that's called collapse of
The
pandemic.
LPPR we think is a collection of agencies. The card earlier says that this is sufficient to solve the complaints that OPPR was created to bolster the government's push to addressing health emergencies. Like that's the earlier part.
Okay, but you have not read, can you give evidence such a pandemic is coming?
No, that I just explained this. It says quote pandemics are essential consequences. And then it says quote pandemic threats arrive.
The bottom part says
Yes.
may not. How is we not just completely miscut this card? Okay, it's climate, right?
Yes.
The IPTH card, you said that it's precise. It says, for the definitions for the purpose of this part is that and or means can. How is this intent to define?
Sure. The IPDH evidence is in the context of a government organization defining what and or should mean in the context of law. We think that's sufficiently precise.
That's fine. Let's respond to it and then resolve the argument.
We all, yeah.
It's the advantage. T and or. Spec become 42. The if and only if counterclaim. The advantage counterclaim. Determinism. The capitalism type. TRA. Or cap, TRA, oil.
I'm sorry, can you do that one more time?
The advantage, T and or. Spec. If and only if. Advantage counterclaim. Determinism. The capite. TRA. Oil.
Order on advantage.
Capite. Anyone not good? One to one burgers for viewer and it's specific to all of the persons actually checking it just on two photos and that are apparently miscalculated and just see that they didn't see that they were able to pressure them into class algorithms wrong talk about American students who only thinking very short impacted they empirically don't big having the China competitive I love group saying and doesn't seem uncles it's about them that's the achievement is wrong so it shows that it's not working and it's not because photos is inevitable and if you can and try to be able to overturn that yes she is wrong there doesn't seem to be new assert for acquisition it's just about and this is how it's not all about all at work their case wrong my job complies and will deal with their own interests to find out like this is especially wrong which makes sense the directly now because that population is obviously gone and you can look at the evidence doesn't see that in the way forward medical players not it's not awarding it's in their best interest for the Russian economy and Russian economy can shape American working. Russian economy is labor sources which are about 10% cut that 10% independently Russia does not including the NSR open to floodgates even if it's not more in the Arctic there's more else in local form which just says that we should press upwards and apply to other places the Theodore. Counter and or means or can it's X or Y and or Y means Y or X or both Y or X or both prefer one at this first the after we one to short of larger quality engagement tubing negative kind of one to even have the applicant has to look often consistent thing I mean you need to data concept inserted technical part of the leading you didn't ask in process and we can facility if I ask in process it's only with reference but we do go reading as well as learning representatives you can have to sign up first implement reference check on security can't be 6 minute part of the plan to something implement like this not because it should continue to be on no not for second trying to talk anyway the words to be interpreted, piece process for above, if and only if. Permit that not if you the OPR if only somebody is just my negative, I feel an question asking fully wrote out some words so that freedoms are artificial generated by trade on dollars for see at what's in the channel. Purpose we should have to off to remain is only for the perfect compromise of the present time the compromise plan. Or second way to begin, I can't feel it for because you can't show constant the plan and even include the impact skeptical and third purple is miscuts and just reject the court on face advantage on permit that and complaints on actually apply like no there's actually a patterns little bit of relation like your policy obviously no one's obviously very conscious control and political institutional opportunity included really answer for situation cut situation militarized inside quote and working out how personally and what involving Alice in the status code also cover this is all declaration because it's not first striking just let's try and rush to take those areas of triggers every single impact and reaffirming Alice is also the only way to determine this. Passive returning to wrong years letting out in the absence of impact there's no impact in trying wrong is no to valid to be wrong with emphasis of occupation I determine some truth of threat of good negative which means no often to good negative determines what's wrong and really coming every single one. But taking that out of the goes from running to showing the resource of certain items of holding. This is a cover by the child in the mind goes to determine sloth and what was they follows cut that follows captive one way that after possible the only frequency 20 years there's classes to be unique plus all the features all and that's uncontrollable those all come just bad with you it's an office structure one set later delete the best abstract to being private after I could really possible definitely private experience people know I've also been to national university for national institute and council of China and it's the council of China if you live in the global council system chaos and chambers then it's then not present on our through the band limited complicated movie in like you might just be considering what we have higher risk people having fun to opportunity for that and then I'll have and to your right. Do you both count only if you have also not individual system that's solved into private activity which would be very sustained for the negative and it can't be on negative action just like Canada. You should work through the app in experience in class world class 50 408. The process of chance being log questions for the company has not determined their student so there's nothing chance for you to know every for wait the less thing is common house from public and narrow majority no until here they only restrain ability to serve the difference of broader executive workers to build on so all inserted in green oil 1 per 2 drop every other party comes industries only 3 drop offers the future protection no if you need to 100% it's specific and it was not binding on before. It was not binding on political will in concrete action losses consider more technically. Gross and the increases in Harker Washington shares and vulnerability, I was solution to not providing one consent of US and data temperature to non consistent consent US or making separation of the everything new words is at 5% after at 1% per month. The more information for its periods because years after correction 1% maximum need of 7% and it will be over to find stop environmental regulation to start routine or continue on the sliding environmental regulations.
Started voting issues where I bet like. I got active VR and first one, voting issues.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, it's in the document, but our plans that we are, individuals.
That's all.
And the, oh, we are, oh, we don't need it.
Uh, Yeah. It's been over here. Okay. Please.
Did we send the cards?
Yeah, sure. Oh, shoot, no, I can send. And I forgot to send it on. Give me one minute. Yeah. But it's not a problem, it's just like concept of problem.
There are cards in this document, so I think that this is.
You're on it? Allegedly, it can only be voted here, promise they conceded out of the one in theory technically. You should drop the argument on all one in theory. A is condo, if you kick the captain and resolve any form of abuse, because there's no way it irreparably skewed the round. Second, is that they've conceded that to one in theory, force a judge intervention because you never really accepted side two responses to two arguments for change. They should dogmatically just drop the argument, otherwise it forces, and forces me to spend 3 minutes on 15-second shells because which irreparably skews the two arguments that makes being negative possible. That anybody else defend the violation confidence is legitimate, one they should get to win. If confidence competitive, then it is a statement of opportunity cost, and if it's not competitive, then there was no abuse, because then it is permuted to literature. It's predictable because it's literature, it's predictable. It's specific to and counted, excluding it would be arbitrary, it's post facto, there's no product. What constitutes even only either way, no drop in the data warrant conduct, or conduct justifies it. Critique. It's tired out for the alternative. They've conceded that capitalism is unsustainable globally and militarized towards extinction and destructive profits, resulting in environmental crises, war feedback loops, cut off our ability to respond to taking first one scope capitalism. But the root cause of multiple convergent crises, the solves an approximate cause risk of human extinction seconds in terms of case gap, can resolve climate or the environment or anything like that. The logic of how this development makes its impact. Inevitably, it occurs also, obviously, in terms of war job capitalism. Is the reason that wars happen in the first place because it's the profit motive that causes Russia and countries and Russia trying to expand, which means they drop them unsustainability argument. We need the game over 1R1. We meet the framework in terms of the alternative is material, solve case, and the link is to the plan. None of the optics is contextual, philosophical competition. They get to win the plan, which resolves all of their options. No impact of fairness. One impact solves. They decided one in C2, no impact goes straight away. It's something is going to be violations for them. Those coaching state, etc. And low competition, straight class, one who maximum ground, they will not impact trend, and investigation of capitalism, two direct service works, no gaming exists. Makes us on the company's application, things are across capitalism, well, question three, no offense, all they need is the defensive capitalism and their theory of IR. Now, I'll do all the voting issues here. Countership, we get private, utopian, and international. Yeah, it can only if they have a solvency. I can't once sponsor cars. We don't, we don't have voting. I don't think they said that because we all isn't one. Standards, one testing evaluate any germane opportunity cost resolutions of the United States. Fourth, to give interacting other options to logic, create discussion of good. Now, for this one, we get the actual John discuss the facts, not implementation, three forever going the alternative is necessary. The fourth one to justify the role of reading the change will happen. They need to justify why they shouldn't know offense requiring reading of objectives, predictability ground. They can research and prepare against that this was also way too blurry. They did not explain at all how the alternative violates this, which means that even if they're right about it, they did not say that in the 1 year, which means they did not. We should not let them go for this in the 2 years. Also, the other argument about private active PR on the discount because we get private PR. They also start argument one if you can take the alternative that would also just trigger presumptions. If capital is not stable, they can never solve impact answers. This also answers the double bind argument, we can't solve trending for not international. We are, which means that doesn't matter now. I'll just quickly extend the link, not tested at all. The app becomes part of global comments. So English allows them taking away ocean territories from global comments and allows individual nations to prioritize them. It's literally never rejected from application. For all instruction figures, the Western world constructional analysis. That was once even that. Now the permutations, you can group both, reject both permutations, one, both separate, that's fair. It's not a question of whether advocacy. What happens on these for whether the philosophically compatible, they aren't, that was dropped, linked to mutual exclusivity, UNCLOS expands these systems are going to advance, those plans that are just a terrible model, because we have to take out deal expand plan, should compete, it's the opposite of the act, through the core tenet, of the one AC agrees, and interpretation as a function philosophy, specific carbon projected, in terms of a new one, don't make the possible new, there's also known that benefit of solving ways the app, which is just broad looking, the reason include plans that with the link proves the results of capital expansion, quickly extend the alternative into works in the national, the global south, and the everyone comes together, besides to establish communist governments, etc. They would also materially kind of new colonials, and it's proven to work like things like the non-movement, United Arab System, and people's recognizing quota, the stuff about the cases and impact, the alternative, it's also based on workers international teach control the means of the national it's more completely infeasible, that was the only impact extended, out of the 1 year expanse in the media and global capitalism is the root cause of every impact, which they just drop, which means there's only risk the alternative consult the underlying structure behind them. Their only answer to the alternative at all was to do with transition work. The problem is that they dropped that the alternative is international, but also a private act movement, i.e. officials and government, also changed their mindset and so on, which means that there's no transition war in the first instance, everyone just agrees to be communist, which also means it solves way to more than sufficiently quickly to solve climate change and yeah, we just say the world should exist in social. So also, no alternative, they also just drop capitalism as unsustainable change. There's only rest of alternative can solve and dozens of examples of the dynamic series proves there won't be resistance, Thomas, and perfect. Policies are good, but they're having continued to go around more because they're only waiting for election. 100% time has no flexible city transition factor to find something. You said per after all that fails, so the alternative advantage plan and after capitalist expansion for sure. That was a fault. Look, their only argument against capitalism, the cap good bad debate was not responsive because they dropped the alternative is international. That means that there cannot be transition works. Even if you think there is some risk about it, they've dropped that the alternative is popular, which means that there's no risk anyone would retaliate. And furthermore, they dropped capitalism is unsustainable, which means that there's only the alternative case. I'll quickly extend some defense first. The first one, the China scenario, no reason why China would listen. The clue reality was dropped. It says that China does not care about international law. This is descriptive entirely. But the UNCLOS ruled against them in the Philippines case. They just said we do not care about international law. There's no explanation of why the US joining would be able to make force them to abide by UNCLOS. They would just say we do not care anyway. And then debate the US into going into war. The only explanation of how they'll also just drop that Trump does not care about diplomacy. They're right that he wanted to do it, then he would have joined UNCLOS already. In truth, there's no explanation of why they would engage in diplomacy. Instead, he just uses UNCLOS to expand people navigation operations, which also turn the case. The Russian scenario is one. They have no explanation of why Russia would first in the first stage. They drop clarity. It's just Russia's best economic interest in the region, which means there's no reason. They would launch a nuclear weapon or go to war in the first stage. Second is they've dropped. And the second is they dropped that Russia would just leave. Phoenix was said he would take 60% out of the Arctic and nothing less. Which means that there's no way we could convince Russia to give up less of their claims.
Well, the second one, said it on that CS scenario.
I just said it. China doesn't care if we're highlighting. Strong doesn't mean diplomacy.
Yeah.
And then that sends the link there with the app with navigation.
simultaneously allowing to build coalitions, use dispute settlement and a non-necessary policy that can only happen under the Octos framework that's private and big. Outlays on tobacco, China is approaching now and increasing its aggression and border diplomacy and low trust is making rapid escalation likely that's the same evidence factor. Always is always to intervening actors solving longer time periods like capitalists for example work on expense are often all cannot solve the short term China because you're the only piece outside that's read a piece of reverse causal that explains that only the plan and nothing others to be able to solve it. And you're right. That the alternative bans depend and they've not explained as for a specific reason as to how you would be able to resolve an SCS conflict or China's vested interest in the region means that it's try or die to go permanent. First argument is the first argument was the Q3 highlighting about one, you drop that it is to the status quo and it's about how China doesn't link to the island now because the US is not ratified UNCLOS. Second, you have dropped the gold seal evidence that was explicitly extended in 1 year that we can create pressure and force China to comply and that would only happen under UNCLOS. You should read the wrong of the part, it is excellent and it is far better than the Q3 highlighting. Third, the not diplomacy. This is a new argument. The 2 hour scratch off the flow. You drop that we are able to comply them into pressure and the finding evidence that even after China listening, you're able to create allied coalitions in order for China to create their world order. They have to have allies too. So be their own interest, be against their own interest. The yake. The frame is try or die does not matter if they can function concede that the alt means we actually die. Presumption calculus is permanent, especially if we know the alternative cannot solve any of their impacts either. Which flip try or die calculus. So alt fails. First, private act of fiat is bad. Just like world peace counterpart allows them get away with new implications. This was not an implication in the one piece. You must let us get new responses or you should just at best scratch it off your flow. The one C part is de-highlighted nothing, so you cannot publish good on this. But independently, it's a bad model because it lets you just fiat away any problem and that we cannot reasonably predict, especially the implication shift in the 2 hour trees all cannot solve the case because they cannot solve for China and other big emitters and then big countries that are able to come forward. Now, philosophical competition, you have dropped that philosophical competition is bad in 1 year. It lets them get away with no permutation, which is the cornerstone of further strategies versus repeat. And if they just win 1% of the risk of the link, which should not solve any predictably often if it is not the causal means like they say that fairness is inevitable, but this is wrong because it doesn't do the scope of fairness and even if cost capital and theory is bad, we can generate deficits to those, but we cannot generate deficits to critique if they're not implicated. Now, per double bind, per do the app, and then they're actually per double bind. If they have the plan later, but if it results in a complete private actor shift away from the plan, that it means that it resolves or at least to some of the offices that every single person changed their mind to me, and it happens even if we ratify UNCLOS or not. The second argument is that I can go first transition for the award. The all alone fails. Private does not matter. There's only a risk of the all causing should not solving any impacts of external vision and reasons why happens good. This fifth evidence is pretty specific as why this man and economic statistics will have no implication or being able to solve environmental degradation empirically proven by social leaders in the Soviet Union and Bolivia and also a touch of armed conflict, even if they are waiting that transition to happen now, it does not matter because even if it does, I think they will pursue pro-climate or anti-war policy to be able to solve for their own impacts. They definitely cannot solve for the alt. They have the plan and they've not protected why the alt solves. That's yes.
They-
Do you guys